I'm happy and honored to invite a colleague, and I might say also a friend, Professor Mוחמד Yahya, if you would allow me to say he's my friend. And Mוחמד is a professor of social work at the Paul Berwald School of Social Work and Social Welfare, one of the first academic researchers who focused on domestic violence and child abuse and neglect. And we've asked Mוחמד to be a discussant, and then we'll follow on. Mוחmad, please.
Right here.
That we are friends.
No, that you are happy and honored.
Okay, I will sign it later.
Okay, today. So I don't feel that I have any powerful points, though, so I did not prepare a PowerPoint. So I'm going to read my presentation from my papers. Okay. First of all, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to Xarov Institute for inviting me to take part in this impressive seminar and to participate as a discussant for the lecture by Professor Sabina Anderson. I would also like to indicate right at the outset that I'm not an expert on most dimensions of evidence-based practice, although I am a strong supporter of the idea that interventions in the mental health professions should be evidence-informed. I also believe that there is much room for facilitating and supporting the use of insight and experience in inventing and innovating and supporting and innovating interventions in the much room for facilitating and supporting the use of insight and experience in inventing and innovating interventions in the mental health professions. I feel compelled to mention this point, which reflects my beliefs about the main theme of this seminar, even if it is not directly related to the focus of my presentation here. I had the chance to read Professor Sabine Anderson's presentation, and I should indicate I have learned a great deal from you. Generally speaking, all of the dimensions addressed in Professor Anderson's presentation can easily be perceived in their sociocultural and sociopolitical context. That means the individualistic societies. However, they might somehow be perceived differently in collectivistic societies. In my presentation today, I have chosen to discuss the possible relevance. I'm not saying for sure what I'm going to say is relevant, but I'm saying that the possible relevance of the characteristics of collectivist societies to examining the problem of sexual abuse. Extensive theoretical and empirical literature has been published during the last 3 decades about models for prevention of sexual abuse and intervention with victims and perpetrators of sexual abuse. Some of this literature includes research that has also examined the effectiveness of those models. This literature refers to models that were developed, implemented, and examined in Western societies, which identify with individualistic tradition and ideology with all that it entails. The individualistic orientation focuses, for example, on recognition of basic human rights, priority for individual needs, and the notion that collective well-being is an outcome of individual well-being rather than the reverse. In my presentation and response today, I raised the general question: to what extent are the available models of prevention and intervention in cases of sexual abuse applicable in collectivist societies at the same levels of success and effectiveness that were reached by implementing them in individualistic societies? Or is there a need to culturally and socio-politically adapt and adjust these models in order to maximize the appropriateness and effectiveness of their implementation in collectivist societies? These are 2 heavy questions among important and relevant questions for the domain of today's seminar in general, and prevention and intervention with victims and perpetrators of sexual abuse in particular, which I doubt if I would be able to answer in this seminar. Nonetheless, I will share with you the characteristics of collectivist societies, and then I will present their relevance to some issues pertaining to developing evidence-based practice with cases of sexual abuse. What is collectivism? Collectivism is a cultural pattern that exists mainly in the Middle East, Asia, Africa, South America, and the Pacific, as well as in some Eastern European countries. In addition, this culture pattern often exists in communities within individualist societies as well. For example, in Western Europe, North America, Australia, and New Zealand, where the first, second, and third generations of the communities came from collectivist societies. There are numerous types of collectivism, of which the main ones emphasize the extended family as well as the work group, the tribe or collective community, country, etc. Members of collectivist societies are characterized by a sense of obligation to their families and collective community and by a strong desire to help satisfy the needs and desires of people from their society. This provides them with a sense of personal satisfaction, self-actualization and fulfillment, as well as with a feeling that they are maintaining harmony with their collective. In collectivist societies, individuals subordinate their personal needs and goals for the sake of achieving familial and collective needs and goals. A central belief maintained by members of collectivist societies is that their own survival, well-being, and progress are linked with the survival, well-being, and progress of their families and collective rather than the other way around. Therefore, members of those societies often perceive the benefit of their families and collective as taking precedence over their own personal benefit, or at least they give equal weight to the benefit, well-being, and welfare of their families and collective. In the following, I would address the self, activities, attitudes, values, and behavior as defined and perceived in collectivist societies, and then I will briefly indicate some issues and questions in accordance with the earlier mentioned two questions. As with regard to the self, collectivist cultures emphasize the importance of the familial and collective self and identity, are less concerned with individual identity. In these cultures, the self is merely an appendage of family identity, although it is also sometimes an integral part of ethnic, community, and national identity. Therefore, family and collective identities are significant components of personal identity. Self-esteem, self-image, and self-concept in these cultures are dependent on the family, ethnic, and sometimes the national image. Hence, the reputation and status of these collectives are also more significant for the individual than personal achievements and have a strong impact on one's self and identity. Thus, in collectivist cultures, the success or failure, as well as the well-being or problems of one person in the family, are the concern of the entire family and not only his or her own concern. Moreover, the reputation and name of the family and the rest of the collective depend on the behavior of their members. This indicates that in collectivist cultures, there is often a mutual link between personal self and identity and collective self and identity. Each member of the family is viewed, in most cases, as responsible for the behavior of the life conditions of every other family member. This commitment often leads to the denial of individual needs and aspirations and causes people to subordinate their own needs and interests to those of the family. Although this ideal cannot always be achieved, there are still many unstated assumptions and values that are consistent with it. As with regard to attitudes, in collectivist cultures, people tend to maintain positive attitudes toward their own collective, which are largely expressed in relations with their extended families. Because people in those cultures derive their identity from their collective, they attribute considerable importance to family ties and believe that their family's good name and status reflects on their own reputation. Therefore, emphasis is placed on preserving and strengthening family relations, which are a major source of emotional, cognitive, social, and instrumental support in times of stress and crisis. In most cases, the family is preferred over over formal support. Additionally, people in collectivist societies usually maintain positive attitudes about vertical relationships. In this context, power hierarchy and vertical relationships are determined according to gender and age, where adult men have more social, cultural, economic, and political power than women and children. Women are expected to submit to their families, their husbands, and oftentimes even to their brothers, and children are expected to comply with the demands of anyone who is older than them. As with regard to values, the main values in collectivist societies are harmony, so to say sometimes face-saving, commitment to the family of origin, mainly to parents, and to the extended family, cooperation, modesty, moderation, thriftiness, and satisfying the needs of others. For example, subordinating and sacrificing the individual self to the collective self, as described above. Additionally, in collectivist cultures, status is defined by ascription, where age, gender, and family are crucial determinants of a person's status in the family as well as in the community. This may happen, for example, in cases where outside parties intervene in sensitive internal affairs of the family and collective, or when out-group parties make statements that are interpreted as disrespectful and insensitive to the culture of the collective. Collectivist cultures tend to be distrustful and suspicious of outsiders, including foreign cultures or signs of those cultures. Additionally, they are wary of social changes that result from contact with other societies, such as individualist cultures or ethnic and national groups that constitute a dominant majority. Common suspicions voiced in collectivist societies include: what is the outside community's real motive for helping us? Are they really knowledgeable about our culture and sensitive to it? Or are they belittling us? Do they really want to help us, or do they just want to dictate their culture to us? They are only interested in taking advantage of us, but they are scornful of us at the same time, and other similar expressions of distrust regarding outsiders and outgroups. Thus, people in collectivist societies usually show more subordination to in-group than to out-group authorities, whether they do so out of an internal conviction that their collective is better than the out-group, or whether their behavior is motivated by social pressure. For example, they may be afraid that if they fail to conform to the expectations of their collective and in-group, they will be accused of treason. They may also believe that outgroups are patronizing towards the collective and should never be trusted. In my humble opinion, these characteristics raise serious questions, concerns, and dilemmas regarding the possibility of adopting models developed in individualistic societies for prevention and intervention in cases of sexual abuse, and successfully and effectively applying those models to the context of collectivist societies. Due to time limitations and constraints, it's not possible to discuss these questions, concerns, and dilemmas in detail here. Nonetheless, I would like to share with you some major questions that may help highlight some possible concerns and dilemmas. One major question that comes to mind is as follows. In case of sexual abuse, who is the victim? It's very strange, difficult a question, but it's asked. In situations of extrafamiliar sexual abuse, the victim's family, as well as her larger collective in some cases, may often consider themselves to be the victims, while they consider the perpetrator's family, as well as his larger collective, in some cases to be the perpetrators of such abuse. This perception may lead to some serious disputes between both sides, which can even become violent. Other major questions: to what extent is the victim silenced, and to what extent does the victim feel that she is prevented from disclosing her abuse because of the above-mentioned characteristics of the collective? For example, is it because of concern for the image and reputation of the collective? Is it because of willingness to defend the perpetrator? Is it due to fear of distrust in the victim? Is it due to distrust of outsiders, mainly when there are tensions between the victims collective and the general collective? Is it because of tense majority-minority relations? Is it because of political conflicts between the victims collective and the state? Whose well-being and welfare come first? The individual victim of abuse or her entire family? To what extent is the victim afraid of disclosing her suffering out of fear for her own safety or the safety of the perpetrator? Or out of willingness to subordinate her right and need for safety due to concern for the needs and reputation of her family? Bearing in mind that collectivist societies place emphasis on family ties, support, cooperation, and related attitudes and values, to what extent is it possible to mobilize the victim's family for the purpose of supporting and protecting her? Because the status of male perpetrators is superior, because the status of the male perpetrator is superior, to what extent will the family and the larger collective tend to believe him rather than his victim? And to what extent will they exert pressure on her not to disclose her victimization and suffering? Do the victim's family and her larger collective give priority to values such as harmony and face-saving over her right and need for safety, protection, support, etc.? I tend to believe that they will not hesitate to help her fulfill these needs and rights, especially for protection. Nonetheless, it happens that this support and protection are accompanied by attempts to silence the victim, as well as by attempts to maintain harmony in the family and community, and covering up for the perpetrator if he is a member of the family, of the victim's family. These are only a few questions that may arise as a result of our discussion and that may relate to the characteristics of collectivistic societies and the relevance of those characteristics to prevention and intervention in cases of sexual abuse in these societies. It is clear that if practitioners working with victims and perpetrators of sexual abuse in collectivist societies attempt to apply interventions that were developed in individualist contexts, they will face some basic dilemmas. The following is only one major potential dilemma that I would like to share with you, which relates to the price that victims of sexual abuse in collectivist societies feel they must pay for revealing the secret of abuse. As indicated, in some cases, outsiders, including formal services, are perceived in collectivist societies as disrespectful and arrogant, and as intentionally causing discord among family members, and as potential threat to the family's unity and reputation. In the same vein, assistance from formal agencies contradicts the notion that the family is obligated to solve its own problems and to provide support and protection for its members. Therefore, the experience has shown that relatively very few victims of intrafamilial sexual abuse request assistance from formal services in collectivist societies, and families are often reluctant to cooperate with those services if a victim has requested assistance. In this situation, the practitioner's dilemma is whether to focus on the first principle of intervention, that means ensuring the victim's safety and stopping the abuse in her or his life, or whether to accept the victim's autonomy to determine the type of assistance she or he requires without any judgment or pressure from the practitioner. Notably, pressure from the practitioner to cooperate with formal services may arouse anger and antagonism among the victim's own family and possibly among her or his community. This in itself may cause her or him to discontinue the therapeutic relationship on the grounds that sexually abusing him or her is not a sufficient reason to reveal family secrets or jeopardize the family's reputation, harmony, and unity. To avoid those potential consequences, the victim may concede that she or he has made a mistake, blame herself or himself for her or his abuse, apologize for seeking assistance from outside parties, and affirm that she or he is fully responsible for solving her or his problems within the family. Thus, pressure from the practitioner may in fact isolate the victim, alienate her or him from institutions that could help him or her, and ultimately make it easier for the abuser to continue his abuse and assault. In addition, such pressure may ultimately detract from the practitioner's ability to promote the victim's self-determination and freedom of decision. The complexity of this dilemma further intensifies when practitioners enforce the law. As indicated, in collectivist societies, intervention of legal and criminal systems is often viewed as overstepping the boundary of private family matters, as threatening the man's authority, and as jeopardizing the reputation of the family and community. This is especially the case for minority collectivist societies existing side by side with a majority individualist society. On the one hand, practitioners are expected to view the law as a means of ensuring protection for the victim and as a resource for deterring perpetrators and forcing them to participate in an appropriate therapeutic program. On that basis, practitioners are expected to recommend that the victim resort to the law. On the other hand, taking into consideration the characteristics and normative expectations of collectivist societies, in some cases, resorting to legal remedies might jeopardize the victim in some cases rather than serving as a means to support and protect her or him. Consequently, the dilemma of practitioners in some collectivist societies is not to enact the law for protecting victims and pursuing perpetrators of sexual abuse, but whether they should, in fact, refrain from enforcing to the law. Thank you.